circle and the abyss, that would be the title. On the way, we will no doubt encounter the question of the title. What happens when one entitles a work of art? What is the topos of the title? Does it take place, and where? In relation to the work? On the edge? Over the edge? On the internal border? In an overboard that is remarked and reapplied by invagination, within, between the presumed center and the circumference, or between that which is framed and that which is framing in the frame? Does the topos of the title, like that of a cartouche, command the work from the discursive and juridical instance of an hors d'oeuvre, a place outside the work, from the excerpt of a more or less directly definitional statement? And even if the definition operates in the manner of a performative, or else does the title play inside the space of the work, inscribing the legend with its definitional pretension in an ensemble that it no longer commands, and which constituted the title as a localized effect? The circular duction, this intro-reduction to oneself, calls for what Hegel names a presupposition. In the science of the beautiful, the mind presupposes itself, anticipates itself, precipitates itself. Head first, everything with which it commences is already a result, a work, an effect of a projection of the mind, a resultare. Every foundation, every justification will have been a result. This is, as you know, the mainspring of the speculative dialectic. Presuppositions must proceed from a proven and demonstrated necessity, explains Hegel. In philosophy, nothing must be accepted which does not possess the character of necessity, which means that everything in philosophy must have the value of a result.
As if Derrida always skirts around the issue as we continue reading, because it does not really tell you straight, which on one hand is a French writing, because the French writing tends to be so, unlike English. However, Derrida's true concern is not so much about the truth in painting. His focus is on the philosophical truth in painting, the ambiguity of language. As he said elsewhere, I don't believe simply that there is a difference between thinking and a language. We think in a language, and the philosophy is tied to a language. It is a simple fact. When you name a painting, a work of art, you face the circle and the abyss, mise-en-abîme. That is, you attempt to seek a deeper meaning. In doing so, you dictate yourself. Place yourself in the circle of the abyss. You are in the mise-en-abîme. You seek, you sink deeper and deeper between language and thinking, which only leads to philosophy. In Derrida's own words, you describe the form which contains your discourse. The whole time, we keep talking about the abîme and the circle and the abyss. What are we doing? Abyss is something deep. So you are searching for meaning. And whenever you search for meaning, you are in the circle, you are in the abyss. That is its thing rather than its object, a thing stolen from the abyss, from the present representation. This is part of Derrida's original text. As if a discourse on the circle also had to describe a circle. And perhaps the very one it describes a circular movement at the very moment that it describes a circular movement, describe it displacing itself in its meaning. So we all know that. This is how we do things. When we get into a circle of mind, we're like a cat. We begin to chase our tail. That's all we do. He's just trying to tell you how the mind works. And this way of thinking is the nature of traditional discourse. When I say traditional discourse, since the modern time, started Kant and Hegel, since you were born, this is the only way you are taught how to think. That's just the way it is. A way of thinking since the early modern time that is still dominated by Kant and Hegel. Derrida's task here is to question Hegel's idea, how does this work? Hegel has his own ideas about the beautiful. What is beautiful? As Derrida says, Hegel had already linked essence of beautiful to the essence of art. So that is to say, according to Hegel, it is in everyday life that one speaks of a beautiful sky, but there is no natural beauty. More precisely, artistic beauty is superior to natural beauty, as the mind that produces it is superior to nature. One must therefore say that the absolute beauty, the telos of final essence of the beautiful, appears in art, not in nature as such. This is Hegel's idea. And Derrida here is trying to challenge and question this idea. If you follow this train of thinking, since the object of such sciences is produced by the mind, by that which knows, the mind will have to engage in self-knowledge, in the knowledge of what it produces, of the product of its own production. So that is to say, the mind must put itself in its own product, produce a discourse on what it produces, introduce itself to itself into itself. We're getting somewhere. Essentially, in the science of the beautiful, the mind presupposes itself, anticipates itself. In one word, head first. Hegel is all in his head. So that's why we call it idealism. As Barzun said, actually it's idealism, all in his head. And of course, it is the very attraction to us. Now, it's all in our head.
We are, right from the introduction, encircled. No doubt, art figures one of those productions of mind, thanks to which the latter returns to itself, comes back to consciousness and cognizance, and comes to its proper place by returning to it in a circle. What is called mind is that which says to itself, come, only to hear itself already saying, come back. The mind is what it is, says what it means, only by returning, retracing its steps in a circle. But art forms only one of the circles in the great circle of the Geist or Lebanon. This visitor can be called gas or ghost, gas or Geshpens. The end of art and its truth is religion, that other circle of which the end, the truth, will have been philosophy, and so on. In the circlet of the scientific necessity, each part represents a circle returning into itself, and keeping a tie of solidarity with the others. A necessary and simultaneous interlacing, it is animated by a backward movement and by a forward movement, by which it develops and reproduces itself in another, in a fecund way. Thus, it is that, for us, the concept of the beautiful and of art is presupposition given by the system of philosophy. Philosophy alone can pose the question, what is the beautiful, and answer it. The beautiful is a production of art, that is, of the mind. The idea of beauty is given to us by art, that circle inside the circle of the mind and of the philosophical encyclopedia, etc.
According to Hegel, art forms only one of the circles in the great circle of Geist, which is spirit. It's a big deal. However, Geist, that is really more or less spirit or ghost. However, that it goes to the idea of Geist in English. German says Gespenst. You think about it. The ghost and the guest all tied together. That tells something foreign. You see where Hegel is going and where Derrida is going. Since we have begun reading this book, Derrida keeps talking about circles, enabim, misa enabim, which is rather unclear. However, one is the nature of phonetic language. That's what he's trying to go. Other is the philosophical idea of mimesis, which is the traditional foundation and the backbone of creation of art, which is also problematic, especially the challenges are postulated by pop art, the postmodern art in general. That is to say, the circle of circles, mirrors of mirrors, the abyssal enabim pointing to representation. That's what we finally come to. It's the concept of representation by or through illusion in which we nevertheless attempt to extract meaning from the void. The abyssal from the illusionary state, which again is the enabim, or in Derrida's words, throws enabim. So we are looking for meaning in the void.
Before beginning to speak of the beautiful and of the fine arts, one ought therefore, by right, to develop the whole of the encyclopedia and the greater logic. So since it is necessary, in fact, to begin lemmatically, so to speak, by anticipation or precipitation of the circuit, Hegel recognizes that his point of departure is vulgar, and his philosophical justification insufficient. He will have begun by the representation of art and of the beautiful for the common consciousness. The price to be paid may seem very heavy. It will be said, for example, that the whole aesthetics develops, explicates, and lays out the representations of naive consciousness. But does not this negative cancel itself at once? On the immediately following page, Hegel explains that on a circle of circles, one is justified in starting from any point. There is no absolute beginning in science. 4. The beautiful beyond pleasure, certainly, but also art beyond the beautiful, beyond aesthetics as beyond calistics. Hegel says he prefers the common word aesthetics to this word. Like Hegel, who saw it in the destination of universal art, Heidegger places Western art at the center of his meditation, but he does so in order to repeat otherwise the history of its essence in relation to the transformation of an essence of truth. The history of the essence of Western art is just as little to be conceived on the basis of beauty taken for itself as on the basis of lived experience. Even supposing, concludes Heidegger, that it could ever be a question of a metaphysical concept acceding to this essence. Thus, nothing rules out the possibility that this concept is even constructed so as not to accede to it, so as not to get around to what happens under the name of art, in which Heidegger already calls truth, even if it means seeking that truth beneath or behind the metaphysical determination of truth. For the moment, I leave this beneath or this behind hanging vertically.
In Hegel's mind, it is in everyday life that one speaks of beautiful sky. But the truth is that Hegel does not think that is so beautiful, because in Hegel's basic mind is that everything has to go through mind. You can't use your sense, because the true beauty is in art. The true beauty in nature is not the real beauty. However, if the true beauty is in art, then what is art? What's the origin of art? Obviously, the origin of art is artists, because artists create art. Who is artist? What is artist? Artist creates art. As if those two things are combined in such a seamless way, art, artist, that it makes art. Again, we come back to the basic question, then what is art? So from page 1, we've been reading this book, he already said a mirror, the circle. Got into the circle, we're winding down deeper and deeper. If art combines with artist, artist combines with art, and we go for the origin or the definition, we all have come down to the one place, that is representation.
Keeping to these preliminary indications, one receives Heidegger's text as the non-identical, staggered, discrepant repetition of the Hegelian repetition in the lectures on aesthetics. It works to untie what still keeps Hegel's aesthetics on the unperceived ground of metaphysics. And yet, what if this repetition did no more than make explicit, by repeating it more profoundly, the Hegelian repetition? I'm merely defining a risk. I'm not yet saying that Heidegger runs it, simply, more above all, that one must in no circumstances run it. In wanting to avoid it at all costs, one can also be rushing toward the false exit, empirical chit-chat, green impulsive avant-gardism. And who said it was necessary to avoid all these risks, and risk in general? And yet, what if Heidegger, too, once again, under the lemmatic constraint, went no further than the common representation of art, accepting it as the guiding thread, saying, for example, also works of art are before us, this one, that one, the well-known shoes of Van Gogh, etc., of his powerful meditation, deposits here the famous painting by Van Gogh, who often painted such shoes. The "it is necessary" of this engagement is on its way toward that, in Urtenweg's Der Sprache, gathers together between appropriation and disappropriation, the step, the road to be opened up, the trait which opens, in language, etc., that which later in the text joins the whole play of the trait to that of the stela, of stature or installation, belongs to that law of the pas, which urges the circle to the lemmatic opening of the origin, it being admitted that thinking is a craft, not only the chief step of the work toward art, qua step of the work toward art, is a circle. Each of the steps we attempt to take here circles in that circle.
If you follow his writing and you follow the train of thinking, you'll get somewhere. Derrida here mentions the word repetition in both Hegel's work and Heidegger's work. According to Derrida, what if Heidegger, too, once again under the lemmatic constraint, went no further than the common representation of art, accepting as the guiding thread, saying, for example, also works of art are before us, this one, that one, the well-known Van Gogh shoes, such. This repetition, the same idea that are repeated in Hegel's work and now in Heidegger's work. It's exactly the same thing. What is the same question? Well, the same question is the work of art stems from artists. So they say, but what is an artist? The one who produces works of art. This is Derrida's straight words. The origin of the artist is a work of art. The origin of the work of art is the artist. Again, we come back. What is art? After all, what is art? As long as one refuses to give an answer in advance to this question, art is only a word. Where are we going? If one wants to interrogate art, one is indeed obligated to give oneself the guiding thread of a representation. And this thread is the work, the fact that they are works of art. That is to say, again, it's the representation. So we go round and round. Essentially, we end up same spot. We can't get away from the foundation of representation.
Feast of the whole body, from top to toe, engaged in this circling step. What you want to do, going against the feast, is not to mix genres, but to extend metaphors. You can always try, question of style. Not break the circle violently, it would avenge itself. Assume it resolutely, authentically. The experience of the circular closure does not close anything. It suffers neither lack nor negativity. Affirmative experience, without volunteerism, without a compulsion to transgression. Not to transgress the law of the circle and the pas de cercle, but trust in them. Of this trust would thought consist. The desire to accede by this faithful repetition of the circle to the not yet crossed is not absent. The desire for a new step, albeit a backward one, ties and unties this procedure. Tie without tie, get across the circle without getting free of its law. But it still suffered, according to Hegel, from a lacuna, a lack. It remained a theory of subjectivity and of judgment, an analogous reservation of the principles expressed in the origin. Confined, unilateral, the reconciliation is not yet effective. The lectures must supplement this lack, the structure of which has, as always, the form of a representative anticipation. The reconciliation is only announced, represented in the third critique in the form of a duty, a solon, projected to infinity.
As we learned earlier, Derrida said one of his goals in this book is to compare, to investigate Hegel's work, lectures on aesthetics, and Heidegger's work, The Origin of Art. It's trying to study these two works of writing concerning art. What we have come down to here is that Derrida has said so many times. It's enough to say abyss and satire of the abyss. This is a very earlier time he wrote this sentence. And now we're still in the same spot. So essentially, it's the operation of the missa enemies, always occupied self. It's like a magical circle, and once you drop in, you can't come out. That's what it's all about, because that's your mind. Kant and Hegel come out this way, locked everybody on mind. That's the problem. What this concern is representation. That's the word. And you don't think representation is something new. Representation is an old word. It's been there for a long time. But in English, I think representation gets a little casual. And that's why Derrida used the German word Vorstellung so many times in his writing. He's trying to remind you it's not what do you think. The whole idea about representation, what happened with the representation that we learned in the past from Foucault, the order of things. Foucault was saying that the discourse that in the 17th century provide the link between the I think and the I am of the being undertaking it, that the very discourse remained in the visible form, the very essence of classical language. For what was being linked together in it was a representation and a being. The transition from I think to the I am was accomplished in the light of evidence within a discourse whose whole domain and functioning consist in articulating one up the other, what one represents to oneself and what it is. So this whole idea was broken down by the 19th century. As Foucault says, that by 19th century, language began to fold in upon itself as he continues to acquire its own particular destiny, to deploy a history, objectivity, and the laws of its own. It became one object of knowledge among others on the same level as living beings, wealth, value, and the history of events and men. It possesses its own concepts. The result is that the law of discourse having been detached from representation, the being of language itself became, as it were, fragmented. With this sort of background, what Derrida says here is that in all the orders, the possibility of the representer befalls represented presence, as evil befalls good, or history befalls origin. The signifier representer is catastrophe. Therefore, it is always new in itself. In whatever epoch it might appear, it is the essence of modernity. Things become fragmented. Things are confused. So in this sense, this is what I said earlier, that Derrida is trying to investigate the problem. The problem is that the representation is challenged by pop art and the postmodern art. And of course, we already have learned so much from Baudrillard, the idea of simulacrum. That's what is playing its trick here. So that's kind of situation we're facing right now.
And so it indeed appears. On the one hand, Kant declares that he neither wants nor is able to examine whether common sense, here reinterpreted as a non-determined, non-conceptual, and non-intellectual norm, exists as a constitutive principle of the possibility of aesthetic experience, or else whether, in a regulative capacity, reason commands us to produce it, erfolgbringend, for more elevated purposes. This common sense is constantly presupposed by the critique, which nevertheless holds back the analysis of it. It could be shown that this suspension ensures the complicity of a moral discourse and an empirical culturalism. This is a permanent necessity. Further on, we find related metaphors or analogies. It is again a question of the immense abyss which separates the two worlds and of the apparent impossibility of throwing a bridge from one shore to the other. To call this an analogy does not yet say anything. The bridge is not an analogy. The recourse to analogy, the concept and effect of analogy, are or make the bridge itself, both in the critique and in the whole powerful tradition to which it still belongs. The analogy of the abyss and the bridge over the abyss is an analogy which says that there must surely be an analogy between two absolutely heterogeneous worlds, a third term to cross the abyss, to heal over the gaping wound and think the gap. In a word, a symbol. The bridge is a symbol. It passes from one bank to the other, and the symbol is a bridge.
If we go back to the idea of abyss, so let's say anabeam, abyss. So if it's abyss, and we need a bridge, somehow we need to cross this abyss. And so the bridge, a symbol. What is the symbol? Or what is a bridge? The symbol is a bridge. So now what is the bridge? It's a representation. This question Derrida has asked also has been asked by many other philosophers. Essentially, we're in this futile debate. We debate over the abyss and a beam. Once Derrida calls it the old grid. It's the duality between mind and heart, how you think and how you feel. And that's your abyss, that's your anabeam, that's whatever you want to name that. How do you get this thing work together? You need a symbol, you need a bridge. That's the word representation. We can't do it without a representation. However, the entire so-called postmodern idea is to challenge the idea of representation. This is why we are at a position where we are, because our essential means to live on, representation, is challenged and it's collapsing. That's the issue. Deleuze proposed a different way. He thinks that it's wrong to even to bother this old grid, to get into this futile debate. We always talk about external, internal, image, reality, representation, presence. I mean, the Western world has been debating this forever, since Plato all the way to today. We call that Platonism. Deleuze proposed the idea to reverse Platonism by uplifting simulacrum over the world of representation. We disregard the representation. We go for simulacrum. One point, Baudrillard says, there's good simulacrum, there's a bad simulacrum. As a legitimate copy, as long as we identify it as a copy, we're okay. But in Deleuze's idea, we'll reverse this whole thing. So Deleuze says the copy is an image endowed with a resemblance. The simulacrum is an image without a resemblance. So much inspired by Platonism has familiarized with us with this notion: God made man in his image and resemblance through sin. However, man lost the resemblance while maintaining the image. We have become simulacra. We have forsaken moral existence in order to enter aesthetic existence. Deleuze's idea is that since there is no distinction between the original and the copy, or rather, we have so many copies, and how about we equalize the copies? We not only equalize, but we enhance the copy. So if we make a copy as a simulacrum that gains all the power, then we have no issue. Deleuze thinks that, or in his statement, is that the modernity is defined by the power of simulacrum. If the modernity is defined by the power of a simulacrum, then we have no issue here. Everything is normal now. If you look at this way, then you look at our daily life, politics, and everything, that begin to make sense. Since there is no boundary, why we need any definition? Since there is no definition, then simulacrum become the only existence, the only definition. If we look at this way, then we go back to Derrida as he started, the circle and the abyss. Then we're back where we begin, the circle and the abyss. That would be the title. That would be the whole deal we're trying to resolve, because we can't really resolve this. That's why we are in the mise en enemy. We can't get out.